Again, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for this WIN event with a conversation between Jack Beeson and Carol Mitchell. I wanted to remind everybody that if you have any questions throughout the presentation, by all means, please add your question in the Q&A option, or I know some of us will put it in the chat option. Either way, we do not want to lose that question, and we will be monitoring those two uh, avenues to obtain those questions. And at this point, I'm going to pass it on to Beth Andrews. So Beth.
Thank you, Natasha. Thanks for your help today. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Beth Andrews, and I lead the Women's Interest Network here, the Wilmington chapter here at Wilmington Trust. Today, we'll be speaking with Carol Malone Mitchell, a leadership development advisor and author of Collaboration Code, How Men Lead Culture Change and Nurture Tomorrow's Leaders. And we also have Jack Beeson, who is a senior vice president at Wilmington Trust and head of the bank's global capital markets division. Those of you in the WIN group may remember we had Carol speak to the group several years ago after the publication of her first book, Breaking Through Bitch: How Women Can Shatter Stereotypes and Lead Fearlessly. Carol and her partner in Talent Strategy Partners, Pat Schroeder, work with companies to identify and develop leaders who build and nurture the right workplace culture. Some of you may also recall that Pat and Carol led a workshop based on the Women's Leadership Blueprint to help us explore the competencies that help make women effective leaders. Carol and I have kept in touch over the years and get together for lunch every once in a while. And during one of our last pre-pandemic lunches, Carol told me about her latest idea for a book about men who lead collaboratively. Her idea was to interview men who exhibit collaborative leadership and identify traits that make them. As soon as I heard that, she needed to speak with Jack Beeson, which she knew Jack now. And I remember shortly after I joined the bank that Jack hosted a lunch for our group in the Wilmington Plaza building, which is just a few blocks up from the building we're in now. And I think he felt sorry for us being the last group up there. And so he hosted this lunch, and Jack showed up with food and his guitar, and he proceeded to entertain us for the next hour or so. I will remember going home that night, and I told my husband that I've never felt so appreciated by any other employer that I've ever worked for. Jack has been instrumental in creating the right workplace culture at Wilmington Trust for many, many years. Jack will be retiring soon, but agreed to spend some of his remaining time with us. He's always been a great supporter of the WIN group, and we thank him for that. With that having been said, I'm just going to turn it over to Carol and Jack, and then we'll leave some time at the end of the program to take some questions.
Thanks so much, Beth.
Thanks, Beth.
I really appreciate, thank you very much to the whole WIN group for inviting me and sponsoring this. And Jack, thank you for being open to joining this conversation. I really appreciate that. It makes it a more personal event, if you will, by being able to talk to you about some of your experience as a collaborative leader. So I'd like to kick off knowing that many people have asked me this question, and as well as the WIN group, I think, has also got this question in mind, asking what were the traits that I discovered while doing my research with collaborative male leaders. And I found that humility and the ability to temper ego were predominant characteristics. And I also found, though, and this was something that I hadn't entirely expected, that they really paid attention to the culture. And I have to say that although this was a theme throughout, I saw you as kind of being the poster guy for trying to make sure that you maintained the right culture, and you saw that as a competitive advantage. So knowing that you've been at Wilmington Trust your entire career, I'm wondering if, if that's something that you've always paid attention to, and really, what did you do to make sure that you had that right culture?
Yeah. Uh, it's an interesting question because sometimes I hear the word culture and I almost feel like it doesn't do the definition justice. I don't know why, but it's more than it's who you are. It's what you stand for. It's what your brand is individually and as a business, as a group of people. How do you treat each other? Uh, I said it was a competitive advantage. If and I'm describing our business, it's probably going to sound like every other competitor's business. I mean, what we do is replicated by other financial institutions, but how we do it, how we do the work is our culture, is our brand. Uh, we're competitive. We're competitive with one another, but we are in it as a team. We're in it as a group of people trying to come together. So culture is such a buzzword, but it means so much to me. And I wanted to work in a place that had the right culture as an individual starting out 39 years ago. And I wanted to lead a business with that type of culture in mind.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I think that fairly answers the question.
I I loved Beth's story about you going down to that other location with food and with your guitar. And I think people wouldn't necessarily say, oh, here's a representation of how this man creates the right culture. But that's what it meant to me when I heard Beth tell that story.
It's interesting. I'm glad you said that because listening to Beth, and even though I've been around 39 years, I still have a pretty good memory. And I don't remember, since announcing my retirement, I've had so many beautiful individuals share stories with me, and I don't remember them all. I remember most of them, but I don't remember them all. And um, I think that's a good thing in a way because it means what you did or what we do was a natural thing. It wasn't something that was staged or planned, or it's just what we do. And I'm talking about me a little bit, but I mean everybody in our business, in our group, in global capital markets is pretty similar in that regard. We try to be natural. We try to be authentic, and that's critical
Mhm.
to me.
And
As
you've
I,
got it. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna, you go first, and then I'll come back because
No, I was going to say maybe you forget the story about the guitar because you were a little bit nervous.
Oh, you absolutely, and maybe Beth remembers it because I was extremely poor at playing because I am far from a accomplished guitar player, unlike you, which it's interesting, Carol. You and I have probably spoken 3 times in our lives together, and I feel like we know each other. And I think the last time we spoke, you were telling me about your journey, and I when I am introduced to a writer, I assume you're a writer all your life. And then I find out you're a microbiologist, a guitar player in coffee houses, and so forth and so on, a true Renaissance woman. And I'm curious as to how did your journey get you to where you are today? It's incredible.
Well, I have to say that writing my first book, I think, was the catalyst for me to integrate all the parts of myself together because after I talked to you about this, Jack, I realized I've been writing since I was in grade school. I during the summers, in addition to, playing softball and flashlight tag and all that stuff that we do when we're off, I was writing plays for the neighborhood, and we would put on these plays, and so wow. And then with the guitar, I've been playing since I was 10, and did quite a lot of playing in front of people. So that was all in my background. But after I finished college and I went to work in the lab, over time, I just gradually got away from those things, and I was focused on the science. And then in graduate school, I switched over to psychology, organizational psychology, and I thought that playing guitar would be a distraction. So I really put it away and let it gather dust. But when I wrote Breaking Through Bitch and started craving getting the guitar out, and it was because I was writing. When I was
Right.
writing Breaking Through Bitch, it was the greatest thing ever for me. It
Mm.
felt so good. So I think that, you asked at one point if I had an epiphany. I think that was it. When I'm like, wow, I'm not just a scientist, I'm an artist too. And I really like that. And this is how I can bring them together.
Mm. How about the subject matter? You could write about anything. What drove you to the subject matter?
Well, as this group who is listening, the WIN group, and my colleagues who know me, I've just always been very aware of how gender plays into how we're perceived and what we need to do to fit in, or to be accepted, or to be effective. So pretty much, from the time I was in graduate school and trying to figure out why there were so few women in leadership roles, and the ones that were in leadership roles weren't necessarily seen positively. I wanted to see what were the characteristics that were associated with successful women.
Mm.
So that's what really led me in that direction. Um, and also realizing that it wasn't just me. I was young, presenting science, and the question would always be directed to the guy who was the head of the lab, and not me. Who
Mm.
would then deflect it back and say, well, Carol really is the person who knows
Right.
more about this than I do, right? But I thought, well, I'm not presenting myself confidently enough,
Mm.
right? That somehow that it was me that was causing this lack of um, credibility, or
Right.
not even credibility, but you know what I mean.
I do.
Yeah. So my research, I think, and I think I've realized this now, my research has been all about um, therapy for me, I
Mm.
think,
That's
if I'm honest.
yeah.
And luckily it does resonate with so many other people. So, I feel like it's not just a selfish pursuit, but there are a lot of people that really need to hear this.
Love it. Thanks. Thanks.
Um, so I guess I don't want to make it all about guitar, but what can you talk a little bit about how your music and your singing, how that plays in to you to the way that you lead?
Uh, I think it does. I think it does in that if you're not an accomplished guitar player and your singing's okay, and it kind of drowns out the guitar a bit, thankfully, it shows that you're you're not afraid to be vulnerable, I think. And yeah, I think that that to me is probably the biggest fault of male leaders, certain male leaders, is that maybe by definition we're supposed to be strong and this and that, but I think that can really hurt a male leader in his effectiveness, because to really build trust from someone, you have to show your warts, your weaknesses. And I love to play guitar, but it wasn't a strength. I mean, it's not a strength. It's just that I like to play. I love music. So I wasn't afraid to show that I'm vulnerable. And I think that's critical in any leader, um, certainly a male leader.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's something that male stereotypes, being vulnerable really flies in the face of the traditional male stereotype. And it's something that um, is so important, as you say, to building trust, because it makes you're more relatable. People can relate to you more if you're not perfect, if they can see that you're willing to share yourself in an open and honest way. And again, I
Yeah.
think that's something that I saw as a trend, as a theme with the executive men I interviewed. But it's also something that is so very characteristic of successful women who lead. They 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 really deliberately work at creating common ground.
Mm.
So I can't say that that's something I saw in the research with the executive men, but certainly the similarity there is the being vulnerable and putting yourself out there in a way that people can relate to you personally.
Right. Yeah, I think that's well said. Early in my career, as a younger leader, I had a brand that I was glad I was considered a nice person, but that's that's kind of all that was said. Jack's really nice.
Hmm.
He's a nice guy, and I almost took some offense to that, as strange as that might sound, because the other way to say it was he's not tough enough. You know, he's afraid to make the tough decisions. Because he doesn't want to hurt someone. So I thought about that as a young leader, and I said, or thought about it and came up with the fact that if people know that you genuinely care about them, and you have to have a tough conversation with them, they're going to receive that tough information a lot better than they would if they didn't know you cared. And when you have those tough conversations as a leader, it's as painful for you as it is for the recipient. I can remember as a little kid, my dad would, when he would spank me or whatever, I did something wrong, and he'd say, "I want you to know that hurts me more than it hurts you," or something like that. And later in life, as a leader, when you're having to counsel someone or terminate someone, uh, kind of came back and said, "This hurts me. I didn't never said it, but it does hurt uh, the communicator as much as it does the recipient. And if it doesn't, that means you really don't care, or don't care as much as you should." And I think genuine careness, um, and the trust and the believability uh, is so important, because you can virtually have any conversation with someone at that point. As hard as it may be, you can still, there's no topic that's not that can't be covered.
Hmm. Um, so what I think the last year certainly has emphasized is that empathy and emotion from leaders is really effective, because again, as you said earlier, it's the way you gain people's trust. But for so long, and again, this goes back to some of the issues around women leading. You know, we all worried about being emotional because just, you know, just having moist eyes and it's like you're weak, you know, well, I'm not sure this person can handle leadership. And for men, I mean, at, before our awakening in the last couple of years, um, men had it doubly worse if they got emotional. Not only was it not good to be emotional as a leader, but not to be emotional as a man, right? So I see this moment in time as a real challenge for men in leadership. And I think the good news is that I've met so many wonderful male leaders who are collaborative, who are willing to share themselves, um, and maybe they've just got the creds because they've gotten to a high level in their organization. That when somebody says you're too nice, you know, they can be like, you know, I, I'm just being authentic and I'm leading the way I know is effective, right?
Right. I'm smiling on the outside and the inside because um, I'm reflecting on how many times I've choked up or my voice has quivered uh, in a presentation over my career, and it's been often. Um, and never did I regret it. Never did I say, boy, you shouldn't have, you know, afterwards, you shouldn't have done that, because it gets back to what we've been discussing. It shows that you're just like everybody else. And it's okay to show your emotion. And maybe it's good that you show your emotion because it shows you care. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. And I mean, another question that I get asked is if anything surprised me in my research. And I would say that I was surprised at how much I could relate to the men that I was interviewing. And, you know, you're a great example. um, I and relate not just because of the characteristics you're demonstrating that are collaborative leadership, but I would say that also recognizing the how difficult it is to convince yourself that it's okay to be emotional. You know, I will beat myself up even to this day, um, even when I really shouldn't. We had a launch party for Collaboration Code,
Mm,
you know, just before it came out, and we just invited everybody, our clients, our colleagues for that go way back, and there were people popping up on the screen because we had all the tiles, you know, little thumbnails coming up, and there were people I hadn't seen in like 15 or 20 years, and I started to choke up, and you know, I just couldn't really get over that. So that, you know, as we're talking, Pat's interviewing me, and
mm,
I was so personal and out there, and then I'm like, oh, you know,
yeah.
I didn't do a good job because, you know, I didn't, whatever, I wasn't professional enough. So I do it even today. So I can
Well,
relate to men in that way.
yeah, I can relate to some uh, women that I admire immensely who I know present a tougher exterior in the workplace than what's going on internally. And it's I know why, and at least I think I know why. It's because they have that concern that would show weakness, or it would show a female uh, persona that maybe they don't want to present. And uh, as many of the people on the line that work with me know, my successor is Abby Merzinski, and she she's as tough as nails. She's curious, she's smart, and she's got a engine that just keeps. She works extremely hard, but on the inside, she's just like she's very caring. I know she cries. I know it's we're all different, but we're all very much the same, I think. And she's terrific. I hope she's on this line so she can hear me singing her praises once more.
Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question for you, which I was thinking about, and that is, there's certainly a pendulum shift to equality, and that's just great. And that's part of the reason we're having this conversation. What happens to Carol when there is equality, or maybe the pendulum swings the other way? Are you going to write books about men and how we can get equality, or no? What, I guess, all kidding aside, what's your next? Where do you go from here?
Yeah, and I'm glad that you asked me that question on email, and I didn't respond to you. And so, but it gave me a chance to think about it, and I'm still formulating what my next step is as far as writing, and I know that I have to bring together the research I've done with women and with men, and bring it together, process it, and help organizations really blend the two. And so many, well, not so many, but several of my colleagues have pushed on me about, well, these characteristics, it shouldn't be about gender. It should be about these characteristics. And when are we going to lose the gender label? And I'm like, well, this is a whole societal change. So the other thing I'm thinking is that companies, organizations that we work in are, I think, ahead of the society at large around stretching gender roles, and just having this humanity sense of leading. And I'm thinking that the next step on a large scale is for corporate America, really, companies to step up and to support diversity and inclusion on the outside. And of course, we are seeing hints of that now. But it might be that the next step is for those of us who are seeing the positive effects, both personally and, bottom line wise, to try to help society move forward, at least to where we are, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thought I had, because this was a pretty complex question, the other thought I had was diversity and inclusion. It's about, being able to bring people together. They can be who they are and bring their different perspectives. And I was just reading in HBR, in my latest copy, they're saying, diversity isn't just about gender, race, and, various things that we've talked about. It's also about social class. And I was like, absolutely, absolutely. There's a whole part of yourself that, that where you grew, like how you grew up, your context, social class really impacts who you are and how you lead. And in fact, I had quite a few of the men that I interviewed came from pretty humble circumstances. And the other thing, oh, by the way, was a lot of them really referenced mothers, grandmothers, aunts as being very impactful in who they are and how they lead. But I don't remember hearing that from you, so I wanted to ask you about that.
In terms of influencers?
Yes, and also
Yeah.
I don't know that I have a full picture of your backgrounds, what might have influenced.
Well, I think part of the reason I'm so passionate about equality and fairness and equity is because of my background. My father was a college professor at Cheney University, a historically Black college and university in Westchester, and he taught for 30 years there. And he would bring my brother and I on campus, and we learned what it was like to be different. I always say it doesn't mean I know what it's like to be an African American. In that's not my point. My point is we were obviously not like everybody else on campus, and at least from a visual. And that's part of my background. And my mother was a elementary school teacher in Chadds Pennsylvania for 30 some years. So I think school teachers as parents are pretty tough, pretty good. And if I can remember one time coming home and I made fun of one of my classmates, to my parents, and the reaction from my dad was something I'll never forget, because it wasn't fair to the person I was making fun of, and he laid into me, and I just will never forget it. And so I think we are certainly products of our background. When M&T acquired Wilmington Trust Company over 10 years ago, we didn't know what was going to happen as Wilmington Trust folks. But what I believed in was we needed to present to our parent, M&T Bank, who we are, what we stand for, what's our brand, as opposed to the parent thinking they knew who we were. We would try to, by our actions, generate respect. And I can remember speaking to our group after the merger announcement, and everybody was on pins and needles, worried. And I said, let's take a deep breath and let's show them who we are. And we're not going to do it in a pompous way. Let's remember they acquired us. They allowed us to maintain our brand, our name. That's huge. That M&T Bank had never made an acquisition where they allowed the new company or the company that they acquired to retain their name. And I said, you're not the golden children because of that. They acquired us, and let's make sure you know it, and let's make sure they know that we know it. And we had this humbleness to us that got a lot of buy-in. Wow, because it would be easy for longtime M&Ters to perceive that, who are these hot shots? Why do they get to keep their name? And we didn't want that. We didn't want that brand, and it worked so well for us to get that buy-in, that respect, that trust, to allow for investment in people, investment in the business. It really bode well.
That's, yeah.
I think I probably got
great.
myself on a tangent there. I apologize.
No, actually, what you just revealed is how a collaborative leader can influence others to be collaborative. And, one of the questions always is, nature, nurture. So to be a collaborative leader, is it innate? Or can you develop these these traits or, these characteristics. And I wonder what your thoughts might be on that.
I definitely think you can develop into a collaborative leader. I thought I was collaborative, and then I took a couple of unconscious bias classes. And I will always say, the more you can take those classes, the more you'll learn. It shouldn't be one and done when it comes to that training. And I realized that I had some blind spots, and I wasn't putting myself in the position of the person I was trying to influence. Therefore, if I wasn't successful in influencing, it was their fault. They're just not collaborative. And part of my problem was I wasn't understanding who they are, what their background was, all those things that are critical to being collaborative. So I do feel even someone that thinks they're collaborative can get better, and those that maybe aren't collaborative can get up to speed.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, and this is probably the wrong thing to say, there's some people that you're just never going to do well with. And in my career, maybe there's a couple of them. And it's still a pretty good batting average. So I wouldn't get too overworked if there's some person out there that you just can't work with, because that will happen. That will happen.
Mm-hmm.
But use it as a learning experience, because you'll find something about yourself that maybe you didn't know.
Yeah. Well, and also just as we work toward a better place as far as diversity and inclusion, I think it's important for us to really pay attention and learn cultural norms from other people. I think that that's something that, well, I mean, the companies that went global, of course, there was all this focus on, people were opening a place in Japan. They wanted to get people acculturated and have them understand the culture, maybe learn some of the language. I think that we have to broaden that, and maybe not go as deep, but just help people get in touch with these different cultural norms and how we can work with them. And
Yeah.
that'll help, to your point. How do you influence? Well, you have to understand where the person's coming from, I think, in order to be effective.
That leads to a question I have for you. And you described, Carol, early in this discussion, the microbiology scenario where the world was different back then, you were different back then. Knowing who you are today, if we were to go back to the future, you're back in that situation, what would your reaction? Would your actions be different? Because Carol is who she is today versus who Carol was back then.
I think I would have been more confident. I mean, I was lucky in that I often had senior level men I was working for. I was in R&D at DuPont, and I was in biotechnology before that. I just always had a senior guy who would really correct people and make sure that they understood, my level of expertise and credibility, and that really gave me confidence. I think today, going back, I just would have felt a little more sure, and not like the only reason people were paying attention was because I had some senior guy, deflecting the bad behavior. So I don't know if anybody would notice if we were, if we did the, a Christmas Carol kind of thing and went back and I was who I am now doing that role. I don't know that anybody would see it differently from the outside, but it would have felt different on the inside, I think.
Yep, that makes sense. Good.
So I'm painfully aware that, as usual, Jack, we just talked, and time has gone by. But I know that there are probably questions that people have in the in the audience, and I just want to move over in that direction so that we can answer some questions for people. Unless you have something burning that you need to say or ask.
I'll wait for the questions first, and then maybe I'll pop in.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you both. We do have a couple of questions. Here's one. We are hearing a lot in the diversity, inclusion, and belonging space about being a good ally. Can you tell us how being collaborative and being a good ally to diverse groups relates to one another? I'm not quite sure which one of you wants to take that, but
I'll go second.
Yeah. Oh. No, it is a big question. So one of the things that I recognize is that because of the empathy that collaborative men in leadership have, they pick up, they seem to have a better sense of traits, characteristics, skills that maybe are outside the job description, if you will, but they recognize talent because in a better way than I think people who are not collaborative. They recognize those traits and talents, and they're willing to and in fact feel committed to making sure that somebody like that gets into leadership, gets the role, instead of your typical, what looks right on paper, if you will, sort of what the norm is. They are willing to give people that opportunity because they see their talent and they believe in it, and then they support them.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think you said it better than I could say. I also think when you're finding that talent, you have to make sure that those that may have been passed over, or those that are now that person's peers, are set up to embrace the new person. And to me, that is so overlooked when we bring on teams or we elevate people. The planning around that, the impact planning, is so important because you don't want anyone to feel less relevant or so you have to do a lot of prep work before you make certain decisions around that.
Do you have like a checklist? I'm just thinking for those of us out there that may be in the situation. What are the things that you do in order to help bring in somebody new and have them be supported?
I wouldn't call it a checkbox or a checklist, I should say. But I do spend a lot of time thinking about the impact of everyone around that decision. And maybe the checklist is the people that I need to communicate with to prepare them for the announcement, or get their buy-in even, or all of that. So it's not a checklist as much of it is just to be so aware of your surroundings. And it's not just that type, it's every interaction you have. You need to be aware of what might be happening. On Monday, we come in, we have our 10:30 start of the week meeting, and there's 5 people in the room and 4 men, and they're talking about the NFL football games on Sunday, and the female in the room, maybe she's not an NFL fan, and being aware enough to either quiet that conversation and move into a different, or asking that person what they did during, you just have to be, every interaction, I've always said it, is important, whether it's a one-on-one or a group setting, and just being aware in a caring way, not a fake way, but in an authentic way is very, very important.
Well said. I think that's great.
Yeah. I have a question, Carol. And it occurred to me when I was reading your book, you said that in many of the countries that have most effectively dealt with that pandemic have been led by women. Why do you think the U.S. has lagged behind so many countries in recognizing the traits that women possess to make for collaborative leadership?
So I don't know that I don't know how I would have answered the question before the pandemic. But certainly in the pandemic, it all made sense to me that, I mean, people were saying, oh, it's the women who've been successful, who had been successful early in the pandemic. And because I was writing about collaborative men, I thought, well, is it by gender? No, it's the way they're leading, right? And the way, being collaborative and inclusive, not having to be the expert. It's, more about we than me. And as I say those things, that in the US, it is much more about me than we. I think that our culture is it's so much about the, the individual and the superstar. We really glorify, people at the top of their game, and not necessarily a game, but in their profession. But I think our culture makes us think of the inclusiveness and the ability to shine the spotlight on someone else. It's like, well, you know more about this than me, join me in this decision, or we're more likely to see that outside the United States, I think, than we are here. It's a culture thing. And as a result of that, I think that that's probably why you see fewer women in leadership. I think it has an impact. What do you think, Jack?
I think the comment that you made at the beginning of your the last comment about, if I can paraphrase, it's more about the communication and continuous communication during the pandemic as opposed to the gender. Because if you are at the beginning, our leader, my boss, would set up, a male would have bi-weekly town halls, and we've had them every 2 weeks since the pandemic. And we've had different individuals lead those town halls, female, African American, male, et cetera, and as a result of that, I think we've gotten tighter. Our culture's even gotten better during a pandemic, which sounds counterintuitive. So my feeling is what you said about, doesn't matter to me anyway, that I haven't really seen a big difference between male leadership and female leadership. I've seen a difference between who communicates and who assumes that everything's okay, because everybody knows not everybody's okay during this pandemic, and we didn't want anyone falling behind or falling off into the deep end. We wanted everybody to be, as much as we could, okay in this crazy world.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I have another question here. Let's see. The person who's asking the question said, I engaged in a conversation with a transgender person last week who had a unique perspective on the power of hormones. He went from being afraid of riding with some male drivers because of road rage to people being afraid of his responses to people who cut him off. The question is, how can men and women best account for physiology in relationship to how their feelings are expressed?
I'll go second again.
Oh, thank you, Jack. Wow.
That's, yeah, that's a lot there.
Yeah, I have a hard time. I have a hard time with that because it's something actually I thought about wanting to talk to transgender people about this because, my research is really not about people's innate skills and presentation. It's really more around society and how societal expectations determine how we behave and how we're perceived. And I would say that I don't know. I don't know what it's like as a transgender person, how how that all plays out. And I don't have any close colleagues to be able to ask. So it's something that I do wonder about. I do have a colleague who has done research in this area, and it's kind of on my to-do list to talk to her about it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a non-answer. Jack,
Yeah.
do you?
No, it's a fair question. I just don't have I don't feel like I am qualified to answer it.
Okay. I think we might have time for one more question. And I'll start with Carol. So Jack, you don't have to say your go second this time. In the introduction to the book, you recount a comment, and I think you touched on this a little bit, but you recount a comment from a man you met at a conference who asked when you were going to write a book for men because you couldn't possibly use the blueprint you developed in Breaking Through Bitch, because then he would be acting like a woman. What in your view, what will it take for us to get beyond gender roles and recognize people for their value as successful contributors?
Another great question. So honestly, men and women, they have different stereotypes that and expectations that they have to navigate, right? There's a difference. I mean, there just is. And I think what's changed now is that the traits that women demonstrate are seen as strengths now. We now see that, and maybe there were always men that demonstrated these and been successful. So I think the fact that we're recognizing this blend of male and female associated characteristics being a successful leadership type, that we're moving in the right direction. And I think we'll know it when we stop hearing things like, I went to a lady doctor, or had a male nurse, or, my son's being taught by a male math teacher. I mean, oh, or so-and-so's, yeah, female CEO. So when we get away from using the the adjective in front of the title, I think that that's kind of a good indication that we're seeing this move away from this kind of very binary concept of what success looks like.
Mm-hmm. That answer is perfect. I'm not going to add to that one.
Oh, thank you.
Well, we are at the top of the hour now, and I know, I mean, I could talk to you, Carol and Jack, and I could listen to and talk about this topic for hours, I know,
Right.
but
Well, there's the after party, right?
but I just wanted to thank you both so much for joining us today for this conversation. Natasha, thank you again for your support of the Wing Group and being our technical supervisor here. And just want in closing, if you haven't bought the book yet, either book, they are both available through the link that I sent out. They are quick reads, but really, really interesting, really intriguing. At least when I read them, just all sorts of questions popped into my mind, and I could not put it down. Yes, Jack.
Yeah, one thing about the book, the collaborative book, I don't know if we mentioned this, but when Carol was she interviewed me, and I loved reading the book, trying to figure out who I was because she didn't use my name. So for those of you who know me, read the book and tell me if you can pick out which leader I am.
Exactly.
I love it.
Yes, but again, thank you all so much for joining us. We will be sending out a recording after this. So thank you again. And if you do have other questions, please send them to me and I'll share them with both Carol and Jack and try to get a response back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you so much, Beth.
Bye-bye.